You think the Middle Ages were all knights and castles. The truth is far darker. From deadly plagues to gruesome punishments, this era hides secrets that will shock you. In medieval Europe, life was far from the romanticized image of knights and fair maidens. The majority of people were peasants, struggling to survive in harsh conditions. Villages were crowded, and sanitation was minimal, leading to widespread disease. Food was scarce, and famine was common, especially during poor harvests. Bread was the staple, often mixed with sawdust or chalk to stretch supplies. Malnutrition was rampant, leaving people vulnerable to sickness. Houses were tiny, often single-room wooden structures with thatched roofs. Families lived closely with animals, increasing the risk of infections and parasites. Fire hazards were constant, and a small mistake could wipe out an entire village. The work was grueling. Peasants labored from sunrise to sunset in the fields, tending crops and animals, with little reward. Social hierarchy added another layer of difficulty. Serfs were legally bound to their lords, unable to leave the land or improve their social standing. Even minor mistakes could result in harsh punishments. Life expectancy was extremely low. Many children died before reaching adulthood. For the nobility, life seemed luxurious, but it came with political instability and constant threats. Castles were not only residences but defensive structures designed to withstand sieges. Lords and ladies could be victims of betrayal or assassination. Diseases also did not discriminate. Even the rich were vulnerable to epidemics. Religion played a central role in daily life, providing hope and structure but also instilling fear. People believed in divine punishment for sins and witchcraft. Priests were powerful figures, sometimes using fear to control populations. The blend of superstition, poverty, and rigid hierarchy made medieval life incredibly harsh and unforgiving. Despite the darkness, people found ways to survive. Festivals, local traditions, and community gatherings provided brief respite from the daily grind. The human spirit persisted even in such brutal conditions. But the reality of medieval life was undeniably harsh, a world where survival was a daily struggle. The Middle Ages were plagued literally by epidemics that left Europe terrified and devastated. Among these, the most infamous was the Black Death, which swept through the continent in the mid-14th century, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people. It wiped out roughly a third of Europe's population. The disease, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, spread rapidly via fleas on rats, which were abundant in medieval towns. Its symptoms were horrifying: blackened swellings, fever, vomiting, and excruciating pain. Death often followed within days. The psychological impact of the plague was immense. Entire communities were decimated, leaving villages empty and farms untended. Survivors were left to bury the dead and cope with fear, uncertainty, and social collapse. Many turned to religion for salvation, participating in mass prayers, processions, and penance. However, the church was also blamed when the plague seemed unstoppable, leading to riots, persecution, and scapegoating. Another devastating epidemic was smallpox, which struck communities repeatedly. Without knowledge of vaccines or germ theory, medieval populations had no real defense against the disease. Measles, tuberculosis, and influenza also ravaged towns, spreading quickly due to overcrowding and poor hygiene. Hospitals existed in some regions, but they were overcrowded, unsanitary, and often places where patients came to die rather than recover. Public health measures were minimal, and superstitions often dictated responses. Some cities tried quarantines, isolating ships or travelers suspected of carrying disease, a precursor to modern containment strategies. Others turned to ritualistic practices, believing that the plague was divine punishment or caused by evil spirits. Entire social norms were affected. People abandoned relatives, fled towns, and even refused to touch the dead, which reshaped communities permanently. The plague also transformed European society in the long term. With so many laborers dead, surviving peasants could demand higher wages, weakening the feudal system. The scarcity of skilled workers led to social mobility for some, though suffering remained widespread. Cultural responses emerged, too, as artists, writers, and chroniclers depicted the horrors of death, reflecting the pervasive fear and trauma. Medieval Europe, in short, was a continent under constant threat of invisible enemies. Plagues didn't just kill, they shattered social structures, altered economies, and left deep psychological scars. The fear of disease was omnipresent, and humanity's struggle to survive amidst these epidemics reveals the fragility of life during this dark era. Medieval Europe's justice system was ruthless and often terrifying, reflecting a society where fear and control were tightly intertwined. Punishments were public, brutal, and designed to serve as a warning to others. Crime was not only a legal issue, but a moral and religious one, as sin and law were often seen as inseparable. Commoners and peasants faced severe consequences for even minor offenses. Theft, for example, could result in flogging, mutilation, or execution. Justice was often swift, and trials were limited in fairness. Accusations were sometimes enough to seal one's fate. Torture was an accepted method to extract confessions or punish suspected criminals. Devices such as the rack, thumb screws, and iron chairs caused unimaginable pain, sometimes resulting in permanent injury or death. Confessions under torture were considered valid, even though they were often coerced and unreliable. Public executions were common and served as social theater. Hanging, beheading, burning at the stake, and breaking on the wheel were designed to instill fear and reinforce authority. Town squares became stages for the spectacle of punishment, where crowds witnessed the consequences of breaking the law. This created an environment of terror that controlled behavior as effectively as any legal code. Nobles and royalty were not immune, though their punishments differed. Political crimes, treason, and conspiracies were met with exile, execution, or imprisonment in grim dungeons. These dungeons were dark, damp, and unsanitary. Many prisoners perished from starvation or disease before facing trial. The justice system reinforced social hierarchies, ensuring that those in power could punish or protect with impunity. Religion also played a role in punishment. Heresy, blasphemy, and witchcraft were considered crimes against God, punishable by death. Inquisitions investigated and tried suspected heretics, often using torture to force confessions. Women accused of witchcraft faced horrific deaths, usually by hanging or burning, fueled by superstition and fear of female power. Even legal proceedings could be extreme. Trials by ordeal, where common suspects might have to carry a red-hot iron, retrieve stones from boiling water, or endure other physically dangerous tests. Survival or injury was interpreted as divine judgment. The system was brutal, arbitrary, and often terrifying, reflecting the harsh realities of medieval life. The medieval justice system was more than law enforcement, it was a tool for maintaining social order through fear. The combination of torture, public executions, and harsh punishments reveals a society where survival often depended not only on skill and luck, but also on avoiding the wrath of authority. The terrifying justice of the era highlights the dark, unforgiving worlds that ordinary people navigated daily, living under the shadow of both secular and divine punishment. Medieval Europe was a world ruled as much by superstition as by law. Fear of the unknown shaped daily life, influencing everything from medicine to social behavior. People believed that spirits, demons, and witches could cause misfortune, disease, or even death. Superstition was not limited to the uneducated clergy. Nobles and commoners alike often held beliefs in the supernatural. Witch hunts were one of the most terrifying manifestations of this fear. Women, in particular, were accused of witchcraft, often based on little more than suspicion or personal vendetta. Older women, midwives, or those living on the margins of society were frequent targets. Communities believed witches could curse crops, harm children, or summon evil spirits. Accusations were fueled by hysteria, personal grudges, and fear of the unknown, creating a culture of paranoia. Trials for witchcraft were brutal. Accused women, and sometimes men, were interrogated, often tortured, and forced to confess to crimes they did not commit. Confessions extracted under duress were considered proof of guilt. Punishments included execution by hanging or burning at the stake, public shaming, and imprisonment. These acts reinforced fear, ensuring conformity and obedience while allowing authorities to consolidate power. Superstitions extended beyond witchcraft. People believed in evil spirits, curses, and magical remedies. Amulets, charms, and rituals were common ways to ward off misfortune. Astrology influenced major decisions, from farming to battles. Even medical practices relied on superstition, with treatments often involving bizarre rituals rather than science. Fear of divine punishment, combined with these beliefs, made life unpredictable and anxiety-filled. Religious institutions both fueled and attempted to control superstition. The church preached that sin, heresy, and witchcraft invited the devil into the world. Clergy conducted exorcisms, blessed homes, and instructed communities in protective prayers. Yet the same institutions sometimes exploited fear to maintain authority, encouraging confession, penance, and participation in witch hunts. This intertwining of religion and superstition magnified the psychological burden on ordinary people. The social consequences of fear were immense. Communities were divided, neighbors distrusted each other, and lives could be ruined by mere suspicion. Children were taught to fear demons and witches, and adults lived under constant threat of accusation or misfortune. Despite the darkness, these fears also created social cohesion in some cases, as shared rituals and beliefs bonded communities together. The legacy of superstition in medieval Europe is a chilling reminder of how fear can dominate society. Witch hunts, curses, and the widespread belief in the supernatural reveal a world where logic and reason were often secondary to fear, where everyday life was shaped by the unseen, and where survival sometimes meant navigating a maze of suspicion, paranoia, and superstition. Medieval Europe was a land of shifting alliances, brutal wars, and constant power struggles. Monarchs, nobles, and rival factions were often engaged in a deadly game of politics where betrayal was commonplace and loyalty was fragile. Life for rulers and subjects alike was shaped by ambition, greed, and the relentless pursuit of power. Wars were frequent, fueled by territorial disputes, religious conflicts, and succession crises. Castles were built not just as homes, but as fortresses to defend against sieges and invasions. Battles were chaotic and bloody, fought with swords, axes, and arrows, and often resulting in high casualties for both combatants and civilians. Armies looted villages, destroyed crops, and spread disease, leaving widespread suffering in their wake. Ordinary people had little say in these conflicts but bore the heaviest burdens, facing starvation, displacement, and violence. Political betrayal was a defining feature of the era. Nobles frequently plotted against one another or even against their own kings. Assassinations, conspiracies, and sudden imprisonments were common tools in the struggle for power. Allies could become enemies overnight, and promises of loyalty were often fleeting. Kings relied on a network of spies and informants to protect their thrones, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and fear. Religious institutions also played a role in political power struggles. The church could crown kings, excommunicate rulers, and influence public opinion. Conflicts between secular and religious authorities sometimes led to wars, such as the investiture controversy, where popes and emperors battled over who had the right to appoint bishops. In such an environment, alliances were often strategic rather than genuine, and morality was secondary to political gain. Feudal obligations further complicated politics. Lords and vassals owed loyalty to their superiors. Yet these ties were frequently tested by ambition and self-interest. Betrayal within feudal hierarchies could spark rebellion or civil war. The precarious balance of power meant that survival often depended on cunning, vigilance, and the ability to navigate treacherous relationships. Even when peace treaties were signed, the threat of conflict loomed. Borders were unstable, and treaties could be broken if they no longer served political interests. Ambitious rulers sought to expand their territories, often at the expense of weaker neighbors. Diplomatic marriages were used to cement alliances, but these could also lead to betrayal if alliances shifted. The world of medieval politics was a constant struggle for dominance, where human ambition and greed often resulted in violence, suffering, and intrigue. Betrayal and warfare shaped societies, economies, and everyday life, leaving an indelible mark on European history. The dark side of power in the Middle Ages demonstrates that behind the pageantry of castles and crowns lay a world of fear, deception, and relentless struggle, where survival required both strength and cunning. Enjoying the dark side of history? Subscribe now and join us for more shocking stories.